Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We took a little bit of a break, but we are back to talk tonight specifically about a show on Amazon Prime. But before we dig into that, I just want to say welcome. Thanks for tuning in to Back Porch Conversations. Tonight is a special episode, and we're really excited about it. So whether you're listening for the first time or you've been with us since we started, I want to say thank you for tuning in. I want to encourage you in this moment to like, share, subscribe, do all those things that you're supposed to do when you enjoy the content that's being presented. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to share, to speak on topics that are so relevant, especially to right now and to our conversation tonight as it relates to race issues. I believe that we will only grow in unity and love for one another when we stop making assumptions about other people and truly start to listen. Tonight, I've got three guests with me on my back porch. Now, I know we're not technically on my back porch, but it wouldn't have worked. It's a little crazy, it's small on my back porch, so I had to bring everybody in here. But we are going to share more about them here in just a moment. I want to share first why we do these conversations and why they matter. I was wrecked by a passage in Mark chapter 2. There's this story of a paralyzed man, and his friends brought this paralyzed man, and they dug a hole in the roof and lowered that man down through the roof to Jesus to be healed. Now, what stuck out to me about this story is that the men who brought this guy were not paralyzed. They didn't understand his journey. They never understood his plight. They didn't understand his difficulty. They never walked a day in his shoes. What they did know was that they needed to take action to see change. And they stepped up and they took the steps and action they needed to do to seek out healing and reconciliation for that man. And that's exactly the purpose of what we're doing. We, as me specifically and Dustin, we've never walked a day in anything else but a white man's shoes. But we are seeking to understand the philosophies, the culture, the pain, the trauma, the things that we've never experienced. We want to ask the questions. We want to dig in. We want to figure out how can we best love and support our brothers and sisters who are created equally in the image of God. And if we're not committed to doing that, then what are we really even here for? We have to seek unity and reconciliation and justice for one another. So why back porch? That's the big question, right? Because you don't invite just anybody to your back porch. In order to get to somebody's back porch, typically you have to kind of go through the entire house. You have to see the mess. You had to see the toys on the floor, the messed up furniture, the dishes that are laid out. You have to typically see a good glimpse into somebody's life. You don't just typically you might invite somebody into your living room or maybe into your little greeting room, but you won't bring them to your back porch. The people you bring to your back porch are the people you trust, the people you want to have a relationship with, the people that you want to have conversation with, the people who you want to speak into your life and be a part of your family. And so that's why I invite people to my back porch, because these conversations matter. And I trust and bring these people along because I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to be challenged. And each of the three panelists tonight have a different expertise and a different experience and a different life. But at the end of the day, we're all fighting for the same goal, the same purpose, and the same mission. And so I believe 100% that this is a conversation worth having. It's a conversation that deserves our time, our energy, and our effort. And so before we dive in, I want to encourage you again, take the opportunity to share this with as many people as you know and get them in on the conversation. I think the more that we can spread good news, the more that we can spread things that are positive and uplifting and that bring and seek out unity and reconciliation, the more that we can see things change. So, without further ado, let me just welcome to my pseudo back porch tonight, three of my friends and actually three of my coworkers as well. We have the privilege of serving together, of fighting this battle together. And so to my far side here is my friend Brandon Penman. Brandon serves as one of our pastors at Crossroads Church. To his right is Dustin Peed. Nope. His left is Dustin Peed. Dustin equally serves as one of our pastors here. This is Dana Zachary. Yes? Gosh, I always get nervous. Dana, I only ever call her Dana or Miss Dana. Dana is incredible. My kids love her like their own mother. It's fantastic. They run and find you in the hallways every Sunday morning. So Dana is a part of our family now. It's great. We love having her. And so Dana serves here as well on staff, on the front desk, and also anywhere else that she's needed. She is a constant servant and has the best heart. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. So we are talking tonight specifically about Amazon Prime's series called Them, which is the irony of the show. If you haven't watched it all yet, just know there'll probably be some spoilers that we share tonight. So if you don't want those spoilers, watch the show first. It's 10 episodes. Watch the show first and then come back and watch the rest of this. But if you're like, just give me the spoilers, it's fine, then keep watching because it's going to be a really good conversation. The irony of the series title is it really is this us versus them mentality. We're going to dig in a lot tonight into some of those specific topics, but let's just
in more ways than one.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what's so ironic.
Never define who them are.
No,
it really depends on what lens you're watching the show through. And I think for all four of us here tonight, like there's 4 different lenses of who them were in the show. I don't know if that's grammatically
correct. No, it's not. It's totally fine.
Who them are.
Who them are.
Who them is.
Who them is. Who that.
Let's dig in. What are some initial thoughts, reactions? Like, what landed, what didn't land for y'all? Like, let's talk about it. Just broad spectrum.
Emotional. Like I wrote here, emotionally ugly, emotionally violent, visually graphic, but true and necessary. I feel like there's not a lot of good reviews on, you look at the reviews and 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. And I feel like the negative reviews fail to understand the divisiveness is what actually happened to Black Americans, right? Since the beginning of our time here. And so the movie isn't divisive because it's being shown like this is just what happened. And, and so I think people don't understand from that perspective that it's not the movie that's making us divisive. The acts that were put upon us were divisive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's good.
Do you want to share it all, just kind of like a premise of what them is about?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So the show, if you're not aware at all, takes place in the 1950s. It follows what is called the Great Migration, a part of it. The Great Migration was really from 1915 to about 1970, where people migrated following the Jim Crow era, trying to kind of escape the Jim Crow South and expand themselves to the Midwest, the North, the West. And so it follows this family, the Henrys, who no, that's not right. What's their last name? Emerys. So yeah, the Emerys. Henry is the father. Right. But it follows their trek from North Carolina to East Compton, which at that time in the 50s was all white.
Right.
And it's ironic to me how often they say Compton in the show.
Yeah. Right.
Because we associate now Compton
you have to train yourself
with
while you're watching
music, hood, all those things. Very different.
Yeah, I was trying to explain it to my wife, and she's like, I don't understand what the big deal is about an African American family moving to an African American neighborhood. Like, no. I was like, this
is not straight out of Compton.
This is true. That's
like,
very
this is
different.
before
Ice Cube. This was like Leave It to Beaver, which I didn't know either.
Yeah.
I always associate this, just like Little Marvin said in the commentary of the director. He said most people have the exact same imagination in their head when you hear Compton. You think of a predominantly Black community. So much culture and art and all these things have come out of that community over the years, and you automatically think that's an African American community. Well, back in the 50s, when this story takes place, it's not. Yeah. It's a predominantly white neighborhood, and as you see in the show,
they want to keep it that way.
They want to keep it that way. So it's incredible, and then he even talks about why he picked that location. He's like, could have been anywhere. He's like, we could have picked anywhere. He's like, but I found a thing that talked about how Compton used to be that way.
Marvin.
Little Marvin found that this place used to be that way, and he thought, oh well, this is great.
It really is ironic, the shift that occurs. And it talks a lot about, in one of the episodes, I can't remember which one, the redlining that they were attempting to create. And it
that
talks
was in a
about
later episode.
It
in the real
is.
estate
You kind of get some behind the scenes of the, what I will call the systemic racism that's occurred within our system
that's
from the very beginning.
From the very beginning.
Yeah, that was probably the most systematic racism representation in the entire show. I mean, obviously you had some law enforcement in there,
Right.
things like that, but I think no one really thinks about the real estate business being, a part of systematic racism. And you're looking at this going, wait, this isn't North Carolina anymore? Like, there's times where I have to remind myself of where the movie or where the thing is taking place at.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, man, I thought the South was like, this is like the South, the way the South acts, not the way that people out West act. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big portion of what I drew from it. As far as like overall, it's like from the jump, the goal was to go to a better life.
Yeah. The American
but-
dream. Everybody
right.
wants to own a home and
Exactly.
live that life.
But that wasn't the reality. Like,
Yeah.
even when you tried to move away from where you were, you moved to the same situation. And then another reality that really hit me at the beginning was the fact that even though they had experienced so much, once you actually finally watch it and you see what the full flashback of what happened at the house with the baby and all that, even after experiencing so much by people of another culture coming to their house and disrupting, they still, because they had been taught to hate themselves so much, they still wanted to go into a white neighborhood. If you hear the car ride where they're riding to California for the very first time, the dad like, East Compton's better than the Swats,
Yeah.
right? Which is where most of the black
And
people
where
went.
their cousins were.
Right, exactly. But he was like, nah, they had to go there. We're gonna go to somewhere else.
Go somewhere else.
And it's like, man, even in that, it was still
Yep.
not where you wanted to be.
And you do need some historical knowledge kind of walking in, or you're going to be kind of blindsided by some of the things that are occurring.
Right.
So I always want to encourage people, like, do the work. I mean, this is not a binge. This is not a binge series.
It's heavy.
You're not going to sit down and watch 10 episodes in a day. You, like I told Dana.
You can, but you might as well take the rest of the week off.
Yeah, like I got into about episode 5, and we'll talk through some specific. But episode 5, I had to take the rest of the day off. Like it'll just wreck you. And so there are moments, and that's what I love about this show is it doesn't leave you hating a specific people. Like it doesn't go, all right, police are bad, realtors are bad. Like, it doesn't make you go.
No.
It just makes you hurt for a family that's broken. It causes you to emote with them and go, I feel what you feel. I hurt with you. I cry with you. Empathize with you. I don't want this for you.
Yeah, and not just the main characters either.
No.
Like a lot of the supporting cast families too. You're like, I don't want that for them. I don't want the things that what is it?
Betty.
The things that Betty had to go through, and
Yeah.
the lifestyle that she had, that we learned that she had growing up. You're just like, no one wants that for
Their
her.
character arcs, they did a good job of making you like people, which I hated in that show.
I know I couldn't.
I just wanted to
hated
hate
it. I
people.
wanted to like Betty. Like
Yeah.
I rooted for Betty at the end,
I
and
know.
I did not
Yeah.
want to root for her.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about just a short, concise thoughts on the series, and I know we're going to cover a lot of different topics tonight as far as this series just addresses so many topics of what we're facing today in our world, and even just mostly today in America. But for me, and I think the reason why Chris asked me here is the mental health aspect. And you see that through really almost every character, even the mean white men. You see what they're putting themselves through and why they are the way that they are.
Yeah.
And I just think it's super important. So for me, the two biggest things I took away from it was the systematic racism was just like, I couldn't believe some of the things that were happening. And then I'm just proud as someone who's kind of walked through mental health stuff and has kind of taken on that as like my, just kind of like my personal, just want to educate everybody about it. That this show did such a great job at intertwining all of those things so that you see how things are so interconnected. I'll save more for later.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I would say, if I had to give like a just 2-sentence like this synopsis for me, one of the biggest things, and it kind of plays into what you're talking about in regards to like mental health, is the concept of trauma and the effect of trauma. And one of the notes I wrote down was literally that trauma never leaves the mind.
Yes.
If you notice, like a lot of the flashbacks in the movie, they were just replays in the mind of what you've been through.
Yeah.
And so when trauma affects the body, I feel like it affects the mind in such a long term.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a stigma, and you can just say, hey, we'll get into that later, but I think this is a stigma that a lot of people have about mental health and people have about going to counseling or seeing a therapist, is that they think that that therapist or that shrink is supposed to extract that thing out of their memory from ever happening. And that's not what it is. That's not what mental health is about. Mental health is about acknowledging the thing that happened,
Acknowledging it.
observing it for what it is,
Yeah.
learning from what you need to learn from, and not letting it control the rest of your life. Like we
That's right.
see so heavily in this show,
Yeah.
the trauma was not dealt with from anyone in this show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Is not dealt with appropriately, and we see it all unravel over 10 episodes.
yeah.
I would say there's three big themes that I drew out of this that I want to talk with you guys about. The first one is the racial implications that come out of this show. I think it's obvious.
That's
We have
at
to.
the forefront
Yeah.
of the whole
So
show.
you can pick whichever one. You can pick the trauma of the black families that they had to endure. Not just them, but they show other families that have moved to Compton and the battle that they had to go through. You can pick the redlining that we talked about already. You can talk about the microaggressions. So I want to kind of just dig in for a second. Let's talk about the racial implications of this show. What were for you some takeaways, some things that were challenging, some things that were hurtful, some things that you're like, this isn't 1950s. This is like, I still see this happening in 2021. What were some of those racial implications that you guys picked up on throughout the show?
One of the biggest ones for me was the thought of self-hate.
Yeah.
How self-hate is perpetuated, and especially in the African-American community, is been almost forced upon us.
And that was portrayed through the teenage daughter.
Right,
Ruby.
through the teenage daughter, definitely, even through the
Ruby,
mom. I seen some aspects of self-hate, and through the dad, I seen some aspects of self-hate. I also saw how the racial implications end up ultimately having an effect on the inside of the household.
Yeah.
It created rift between the husband and the wife.
Mm-hmm.
It created rift between the wife and her daughters.
Yeah.
Like, I never want to be like mom.
Never
Don't
Yeah.
ever be like mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it also created rift in the whole family dynamic as a whole, because everybody was dealing with their own mental
Yep.
health issue, their own self-hate
Yes.
issue. And so that was one of the biggest ones in the racial side, was that you see how heavily, like, if you're constantly told that you're nobody, you're nothing, then you start to believe that.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I honestly have, not to use this term lightly, I've honestly segregated in my mind over the years racism and trauma. Racism and the mental effects of racism. And that's what I appreciated about this show so much, and that's what I learned from this show so much. Everybody kind of knows the stigma of, the old white, good old boy, beating, a black person for no good reason. We all kind of have been exposed to that, in a textbook or something. Like, we've all read about that. But the neighborhood wives, we don't ever hear about that. The neighborhood wives that would essentially mentally torture a black family so that they would leave. And then how that trickles down into their kids. We saw in the one scene where the kid went into the backyard and urinated on their laundry that was hanging from the
Yes.
clothesline.
Yeah.
And then obviously he gets
Anybody else
chased
wish
down.
that she would have caught
Lucky,
him?
I wish
Yeah.
she would have called
Good.
him.
Anybody else rooting for Lucky right there? Like,
Ooh.
get him!
Honestly,
Get him!
honestly, can I just say yes? But also, I was super scared for her if she didn't.
Yeah.
That part.
Yeah.
That part where it's like, you can't even respond to
I
this
can't.
crazy.
You can't
Yeah.
even.
You're
you
wrong
can't
for even
deal-
responding to the
You
crazy.
can't even defend yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if you defend yourself, you're automatically wrong.
Right.
Absolutely.
That, to me, that was a big one for me as a white man, to understand that a black person could not and still mostly cannot defend themselves without, now emotional person,
Oh, good.
without criticism, without a fair point of view. That's not the word I'm looking
Even
for.
like a
Benefit of the doubt is what
Yeah,
I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Without the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
That
From the beginning.
As a white man,
Yeah.
I am exclusively
Yeah.
given the benefit of the doubt. Exclusively.
innocent until guilty.
Yes. And it's not that way. And you kind of see that, and you've kind of heard that over the years, and it's just, so just seeing the mental toll that racism has taken over our brothers and sisters in the black community over the years just broke my heart.
Yeah.
Honestly, it really did.
I wish that they would have given Ruby more depth. You
Was
know,
Ruby
like
the baby daughter?
no,
Yeah,
Ruby was
Ruby's
the,
the
older,
teenage-
the older,
teenager.
the oldest
She
teenager.
wanted to be
Like her
one.
character wasn't given much depth, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I felt like it's such a unique perspective to
Mm-hmm.
see her character.
She's developing
From-
into a woman.
She's developing, but I just mean like we don't see or read or have not had the privilege of seeing inside of the house like we have with this
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
and the emotions and the trauma and how she's feeling. I mean, to just go into a school, where you're hated, you're not wanted at all, and just the amount of trauma that is put upon someone that age, someone so young,
And one thing I can add to that I remember from the story that was like, it goes back to like the systematic part,
Yeah.
is the misrepresentation.
Yeah.
Right? So when you look at the first scene where they're driving to California, like it pans into her looking at a magazine.
Yeah,
And
and
if you
it's
see
white.
the magazine, it's
It's
all white women.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So that misrepresentation in media,
Yeah.
a lot of platforms
Yeah.
also makes it
Yeah.
like, I want to be like
I
that
wanna be
because
like
that
that.
looks like right.
Yeah.
White is right,
White
is what
is
you
right.
see.
Even the baby, Gracie Jean, right? Wait, what's her
Oh
name?
yeah. No, the
Yeah, I think it was
little girl,
Grace.
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 Little girl, little girl's
Grace.
Grace, yeah.
The Miss Vera book that she was reading,
Right.
you
Became
know,
real to her.
became real to her.
Yeah.
And then the other thing in terms of racism, and you know me and my history,
I love
right?
it. Yeah, come on.
So, in World War II, the mustard gas experiments that were tested on
Mhm.
soldiers,
Which made it into the show.
made it into the show. That's a historical content because this experiment was conducted on Black and Puerto Rican soldiers to see.
On
How-
our team.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Our
American
Fighting-
soldiers.
Our soldiers.
Fighting for America.
soldiers, Black and Latino
That's new for me.
soldiers.
I caught the mustard gas and why he didn't like to smell the sweet stuff and why he was so tripping about the pie.
Yeah.
But I didn't get that.
Yes, and
That
so
historical part.
Henry suffered from PTSD.
Yeah.
Over
Yep.
60,000 enlisted soldiers tested for differences of the effects to establish whether Black and Puerto Rican soldiers were more resistant than white soldiers,
Wow.
so that they could send them to the front lines.
Also because they wanted to see what effects it had on their enemy.
Yeah,
So that when they did shoot
So
the
they were
mustard
guinea
gas,
pigs.
they were guinea pigs.
Yeah,
They were
they were guinea
lab
pigs.
rats.
Very
They-
reminiscent of Auschwitz.
so yeah,
Yes.
so
I've
they
been
were
to that.
battling inward trauma and
Yeah.
outward because there was
Yeah.
suffering there, physical
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah.
You know, you saw especially that scene
Yeah.
where the guy is like
Mm.
in the chamber.
That's the one part of the show where I was
Oh
like,
my
what's happening? What's
gosh,
happening? I didn't
yes.
expect that.
Yeah,
I
it's
wasn't
just kinda
expecting
jumped.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from that moment on, I kind of when
What's going on?
the music started to veer, I was like,
At one point, I actually thought that was tap dance, man.
Mm.
I thought it
that
was gonna
his
be him.
conscious.
I thought it was gonna be him.
I thought like
too.
every time he has this flashback, because he was like in the office and he was going to put up the paperwork for the guy, and he had that moment where he saw that soldier, and I was like, is he gonna continuously have flashbacks to that soldier? Was he burnt himself, or is he remembering seeing other people being burned
Yeah.
through the gas? You know, so
It
there's just so many
him.
parts of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I'll say for me, the one thing that stuck out to me the most, and I feel like the show did a really good job of presenting, were the microaggressions.
I was just about to ask that.
The daily, like, I'll give you some examples.
Yes.
Things like when he comes to the job first day.
And the
Like,
receptionist.
oh yeah, the kitchen's on the third floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, kitchen's on the third floor. He's
Yeah.
like, no,
I don't
I'm
have
an
time for this.
I'm an
Yes.
engineer. She's like, I can't deal with this person right now. Can you get him out of my sight?
Yeah.
Right.
The things like you people.
Yeah.
Like again, these are it's not it's subtle, right? That's the whole point of microaggression.
Yeah.
Things like, oh, you're so smart, you're the highest paid black person.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have colored people like you around here. Like when I look at you, or we see this today, right? When I look, I don't see your color, Dana. I just see you. Like, but again, it was the white women and the white men walking down the street that would take their kids or clutch their stuff and move, or like you begin to see. Again, these are small things. The store owners who are paying attention to them. The person on the two white men on the elevator who didn't even
Acknowledge
pay
it
it.
all.
And when the pen drops, what do?
They waited
wait
for him.
for the colored guy to pick it
Pick
up
it
because
up.
that's what he's supposed. So it's these
Yeah.
subtleties along the way that you're like, that just
No, even like
Makes
the
me
fact that
mad.
he wasn't supposed to, he wasn't he wasn't good enough to get profit share.
He wasn't good
Yes.
enough. Yeah,
Even though he
only
was
the
part of-
qualified people
Yeah.
get this job.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Even though he did the work
Right.
to
Oh,
get there.
but even him and his coworker
His coworker was the one who dropped the ball,
who dropped the ball.
and he paid for it.
Yes.
Or even when there was other episodes of microaggression, like in episode 10 or 9, when they go flashback to the 1800s,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the black guy comes, they're already mad at him because he found the water.
Yeah.
Then he's still willing to stay and help. There's microaggression against his wife when she's
Yeah.
at the table and they're talking about, do you have babies regular?
Yeah.
And what language did you speak
Yeah.
before you spoke
They want
English?
to know.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
want to know what color the babies were when they came out.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Episode
do you
9
push
was
out
one
babies
big
different?
How do you push
microaggression.
out
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to see it, watch that episode.
Yeah, and then another one was when like he was bringing the bricks for the well, and he brought the bricks over.
And they fell.
They
or
fell.
He dumped them early.
He dumped them, and then they said, "Pick them back up, so we don't have to work no more."
Yeah.
We don't have to come over there and get them to bring them over
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So you want me to bring them from way over there to over here, then pick them up and stack them again?
And I'm
It's
glad
like-
we're talking about the microaggressions because I want people, like, I want white people to like see that and identify them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the things happen.
Still today.
They're
Yeah.
still today.
Yeah, and I want them to identify it as trauma.
Yeah.
Because lots of little things, it's like we talk about, when I talk about mental health with people, it's not the major trauma that are issues, like the big major events, like we
Yeah.
saw what happened
Yeah.
to the family in the first episode, where we learned what happened in the first episode. That's a big thing. And that's a big rock in the bucket. But it's the little rocks in the bucket that slowly fill up that bucket to overflowing. And that's why I don't think we look at microaggressions, or I think oftentimes we kind of blur the lines of microaggression and passive aggressiveness or sarcasm. And we don't understand, because we're not putting ourselves in other people's shoes like you're doing on this show, Chris. We don't understand what hurt that's doing for someone else. We just think we're just joking around, right? And I'm not saying we can't joke around. I'm just saying we need to have these conversations so that you know where the other person is mentally
Yeah.
when you're making those little comments.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
eventually you're going to make
Right.
a little comment, and it's just going to be little,
Yeah.
and it's just going to be enough to set that
Just
person
enough.
off, and you're going to be like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Well, I have a bucket full of rocks. I can tell you where that came from.
Yeah. Yeah. But it also speaks to self-care.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And
Yes.
and that has got to be primo priority for everybody,
Yes,
white,
ma'am.
black,
You're so
Latinx,
right.
it
Yep.
doesn't matter.
Does not matter.
As a matter of fact, last week, when you were wanting me to watch it, okay, and I kept just kind of putting you off, I appreciated you not dumping it on me.
Yeah.
Because we were already going through so much,
Yeah.
you know, the lieutenant and Dante Martin. I mean, there was just so much. The verdict was going down, and I'm like, I am
Can't handle
not. I
anything else
can't.
right
Like
now.
my bucket is full. Like I can't even dump a little bit out
Yeah.
to like add some of
To make
that
room.
into
Yeah.
it. You know what I'm saying? Like I
Yeah.
just couldn't. So it's also identifying your ability, your level, and that self-care is key.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
so key.
Yeah, because you got to empty that bucket
You
out.
have to empty that
And a
bucket.
lot of times that bucket gets filled up before you even know that bucket's being filled.
That's right.
Yes.
Because
That's right.
you don't see it when you're
You
8,
don't
9,
see the
10.
little-
You don't
You
get
don't
it.
see the little rocks.
You don't see
Yeah.
the little rocks when you're 8, 9, 10.
Nope.
Yeah.
So tell me,
Yeah.
so I'm going to bring up one thing when it comes to this, and y'all tell me if I'm wrong. The one thing that I know about mental health more than anything else is that you have to be able to have a safe space to be able to talk about
Yeah.
the things that are happening to you. Typically in this show, for at least the first half of the season, Hazel, who plays the father's cousin, or the
Yeah.
husband's cousin,
It's my favorite character in the whole
was that safe space.
Yeah.
That's why.
And I just I wonder, what do we need to do as a people, right, to create, like, what are ways that you have seen yourself creating those safe spaces? Do you have those? What do those look like? Is that friends? Is it only family? Like, who do you trust? Is it, just talk to me a little bit about that, because I feel like that was such a key aspect. Like, even in the prayer part towards the end, who does she have with her? It's a
Hazel.
safe space, even though she's not,
Yeah.
technically in
Yeah.
the room.
But
Yeah.
you know, that speaks, that right there is exactly where I was going, because that speaks to the power of a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because although Hazel wasn't there, like, it was a prayer to God.
Yeah.
Hazel's just usually the person that gets her to redirect her mind back to God.
Yeah.
So it also tells me that a lot of times you might be the only God that somebody sees.
Yeah.
Right? Like your godly aura and the way you carry yourself
Yeah.
might be the only representation of God, right? Because for Lucky to get to a space where she was connecting to her Heavenly Father, which is where she needed to be going to handle this situation in the first place,
Yeah.
she had to imagine that that safe place was there.
Yeah.
The person that always brings her back to the
Yeah.
grounded conscious.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
my answer to that is like, where's your safe space? Our safe space has to be in God.
Yep.
We have to start to go to Him
Yeah.
as the response and as the healer and as the answer, because He's the ultimate example of what we're going through.
Exactly.
But did not say a mumbling word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to take on, especially as a black man. When I see this, it's like my safe place needs to be in God, and He's telling me to do the absolute opposite of what my flesh wants to do. Because
Yeah.
my flesh wants to be angry and retaliate.
Yeah.
My flesh wants to say, forget you, I'm going to go make my own nation.
Yeah.
Right? But I got to go back to my safe place, which is God, and His space, his space says
Yeah.
love despite.
And
So-
then you get that clarity. You know what I'm saying? Like you get that clarity, you get that peace. Yeah, we have family, we have, friends and loved ones, whatever. But like Brandon said, you've gotta like recenter yourself because he's the only one that knows,
Yeah.
the inner depths of the hurt and the trauma, and even we don't know. I don't even know how affected I am with trauma. But God knows, and that's my safe space, so.
Yeah, I mean, what I've learned over the years, dealing with mental health issues and depression myself, is that depression comes from you depressing those thoughts and
Yeah.
not releasing those thoughts.
Yeah,
And that's
Mm.
that's how depression sets
Yeah.
in, because you
you're
yourself,
suppressing,
you are pushing them down.
yeah,
And I totally agree with Brandon, but I also think that the Bible tells us that we are to bear one another's burdens.
of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in that, you have to find somebody that can handle
Mhm,
you talking your things out.
mhm,
And also not just handle it, but lovingly and graciously guide you back to truth without making you feel like you're being condemned.
mhm, mhm.
Because the reason that people don't speak up about what's happening up here is fear of condemnation.
Mhm.
And if they speak it, then they're going to think this about me. You even heard Lucky say throughout the entire show, "Do you think I'm crazy?
Yeah,
Do you think I'm crazy?"
yeah,
And she wants to know. She's in that moment, she's crying out, asking for someone to help carry the burdens, which is why I love Hazel's character so much. She's probably my favorite character in the entire show. It's such a small role, is because she was willing to carry her burdens, and even that, she was willing to protect her from information that she couldn't handle.
yeah.
She knew Lucky's fragile state and refused to let her know about what happened to the previous family who came to Compton until she kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and finally Hazel said, "All right, I don't think you can handle this, but here's what it is." And as soon as she told her, she bolted because she couldn't
Yeah.
handle it.
Yeah,
And so you need somebody like that that can say, "I don't think you can handle this right now." Yeah, but you have to have that person to talk to. It can't be a wall. Prayer is great, and you do need to put all that stuff on the Lord, but you have to have someone or someone's to carry that burden with you. And at the end of the day, as much as you want someone to come up to you and say, "How are you doing?" and you want to be able to respond to them in an honest way, at the end of the day, it really starts with you as the person wanting to talk. And I think that's that's my biggest takeaway from the whole show, and this is my biggest passion, so I could ramble on about it for hours.
well, and plus too, I had one thought, but now another thought about Betty, when you had mentioned like having people
Yeah.
that you can go to. That one line that she said,
Shit.
"I just wish I could take a break from having to make every single
I wish I
decision.
could
Take a
just
day.
get away.
I could just
Take a day.
take
Yeah.
a day, right?"
Yeah.
And it
That
goes
got
back
real long,
to,
too.
She was surrounded with friends,
exactly,
In quotes, yeah.
exactly.
but
see,
none of them could speak truth to each other.
Right.
None of them could honestly say, "This is how I'm
Exactly.
feeling." Instead, because of the depression, the suppression of the trauma, they said, "I'm going to put on a face for people because it's more important for them to think they know who I am
Yeah.
than for them to really know who I am."
Yeah. Well, and then, that goes back to going to God for that safe place. Because what I'll do is I'm like, God, like I don't want to waste my emotion on somebody that can't relate.
Yeah.
Like if I'm coming to you and I think, I can come and talk to you, but it's falling on deaf ears or it's falling on a non-compassionate
Yeah.
ear, you know what I'm saying, or somebody that can't relate. Well, that's just a waste of my time.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And now I got to re-explain it to somebody else that might be able to relate. So,
Can I ask you
yeah.
this question? Did y'all think that, is it Henry's the dad, right?
Yeah.
Did y'all think at any moment Henry was going to kill himself? Because I did. Of just about every episode.
Especially when he went in the stall. I couldn't understand why he was getting so many paper towels.
I knew exactly what
Right.
he was doing because I felt like that before.
Yeah.
Not in,
And then he
not
just
in the
went
same
and saw
not
the
in the same
screen.
way of being, all the aggression and racism towards me, but just not being able to get out what you need to get out.
Yeah.
And he had to
And
go stuff
misunderstood.
paper towels in his mouth and scream at the top of his lungs.
Yeah.
I just felt like that any episode he was gonna take his own life.
You know what's funny is Betty's character in the post show interviews that she did. So the interesting piece about their characters in particular, the white women in that show, especially in the 50s, and I would even note that most of us still do this today, is they had to talk through their smiles.
Yeah.
Like it was very. If you ever watched them, they're very
Yeah,
much
they always
here all the
smile.
time. Like,
Mhm.
No
and
matter
that's
what.
how they would hide
smile.
what would happen. And we always told our student leaders when I was in student ministry, there's a lot behind every smile that a student walks in the door. Our job is to figure out what that is, because they're hiding. Everybody is hiding, suppressing, trying to keep. So that is a perfect transition for us as we're continuing to talk through these topics, to lean into the spiritual side of this show, because I think that it is a very large piece of the show
Yeah.
that is maybe I would say extremely unintentional at
The
some
The
levels.
spiritual warfare in this
But
show
it
is
is.
just. I mean, we all talked kind of off camera about episode 5, and if you've seen it, you know what we're talking about. Or if you're yet to see it, you will know what we're talking about. Episode 5 being really powerful. But I was telling Dana earlier today, I was like, I think episode 9 was more powerful to me than 5.
I
I
do
mean,
too.
5 was disturbing,
Very disturbing.
just flat disturbing,
Mhm.
in the most way.
I was just numb after that one.
And it hurt.
Yeah, but 9, we kind of see where some of this is coming from and some of these characters, and we didn't really kind of hit on that too much when we were talking about the mental side of it, but all 4 of the main characters in this family all had imaginary, not want to say friends because they weren't friends,
Yeah.
but they all had their imaginary demons that were with them every step of the way, telling them what they should think and how they should act.
Yeah.
And every one of them was personified in a different way.
Yeah.
And again, that comes from not talking it out. But
Yeah.
episode 9, when we see the misinterpretation of Scripture,
Twisting it.
and how Satan, who he's later introduced as,
Yeah.
literally Satan is a character in this show.
Yeah.
He is introduced and finally in episode 10 you realize which one is Satan. He's in the show. And how he has intentionally twisted and manipulated truth in all these different areas so that he could have his way of tearing things apart.
Yeah.
I saw in the spiritual, or what I saw in the spiritual was how the man in the black hat made a spiritual contract. Okay, first off, the first thing I saw that was kind of like a spiritual was the concept of how they took biblical narrative and put it in the story. If you notice, he had just lost his son, right? But you know the concept of ram in the bush.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a ram in the bush, it was like an answer to his prayers in the bush, being that little kid that ends up being who walks home with him.
Yeah.
But long story short, that ram in the bush, that quote unquote savior that he thought was saving him, was really ended up being the enemy that
Yeah.
he made the deal with.
I
Yeah.
didn't get the ram in the bush metaphor, but I see it now.
Right? Because the
Yeah.
kid was underneath a bush,
was in the
literally.
bush.
He was a ram in the bush in the midst of my time of I need it.
Uh-huh.
And then the other spiritual side I saw was that, it said to me personally, was that racism is a spirit as a whole.
Yeah.
We don't battle in flesh and blood, but in spirits and principalities.
That's right. That's
so
right.
what I feel that is that the man in the black hat was more of a symbol of how the spirit of racism has been rooted in this land, and now it's permeating through
Yeah.
people, anybody who comes here. It
Yeah.
also ties me back to how spirits are generational, because
Yes.
if you hear that first song that was ever sang by the woman at the beginning, where she's like, calling all the coons from the day da 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 da, she was like, my daddy used to sing me that
Yeah.
song. I used to love that song, right? And it was, I feel like that was a spirit that was passed down from your dad to you, right? So when I look at the spiritual side, it's like,
Yeah.
I see that racism, or I think that what the story's trying to tell us is that racism as a whole is a spiritual thing. You're not born racist.
Yeah.
It happens over time because that spirit comes upon you, and then you start acting out of that spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would venture, I would agree and disagree a little bit. I think from my perspective, racism is born a little bit. Because racism is a sin. And the Bible tells us that we are born into sin. We are born in that sin nature. I think it's nurtured. I think, like my daddy used to sing it to me. She didn't used to sing it to herself.
Yeah.
She didn't come out the womb singing that song.
Right.
Her dad used to sing it to her. It was nurtured. It was watered. It was seeded, and it grew into what we ultimately saw.
And then you see that, because I even made notes on here about social classes and race interaction. Like the community in Compton weren't Southern red, well, you know, they weren't Southern.
They're
You know,
rednecks everywhere.
Redneck.
And I've been saying
Well-
that for years, and this show proved it. Let me just tell
But
you.
look, but they were first generational wealth. Think about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were offspring of slaveholders,
Yeah.
you know, that have reaped the rewards of
Free labor.
free labor. Okay. And all that entitlement has just been
I'm sorry.
has just been
Passed
embedded, passed down.
It just hit me that generation, because I was like, was that the baby boomers? No, that was considered the greatest generation.
Yeah.
The white adults in that show are considered the greatest
greatest.
generation, because obviously of what they fought in the war and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But it's just ironic.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
You're the greatest.
I took away, especially from a
It only gets
spiritual
worse.
side, like the twisting of scripture.
Ugh.
I believe in God, I go to church, I worship, and yet I hate God's creation.
The most faithful
Mhm.
servant of God, the most faithful Christian, the most faithful believer, if you will, in that entire community is the one that Satan went after.
Yeah, because he was good at first.
Yeah.
He was.
He understood them. And
Yeah.
They were like, this
Yeah.
dude is so dedicated to the Lord. He drives us crazy.
Yeah.
He's a prophet.
He's always talking to God.
Yeah.
You know, drives me nuts. That's the one that Satan decided to attack.
Yeah.
And if there's anything we can pull out of that spiritual implication, and again, I don't think we can say it any other, like, you have to have people in your life
Yep.
Yes.
who are speaking
Truth.
truth
And he did not.
into your life.
Yep.
And he didn't.
Nope.
And he trusted an unvetted source, if you will,
Yeah.
that fed him the twisting of scripture.
Yeah.
To say, no, 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 look, do you see how this
Yeah.
is true now?
Yeah.
And the twist of episode, because I watched episode 9, that first 30 minutes of the episode, I'm like, this is so boring. What is happening?
What is happening? Yeah.
And when you see
Then it
the
revs
twist,
up. Yeah.
and then at the end, kind of that, we talked about it kind of off camera before, like that fade away from the
Yeah.
soundtrack
Yeah.
that brings you to like present day, and you're like, oh boy,
Yeah.
like this is what's happening.
Yeah.
You cannot, there is no way that you can deny, whether intentional or not,
Yep.
the spiritual implications that run
Yeah.
through the show, and
For
the
sure.
battle that every single character is fighting, not just from the outside forces that are coming against them, the neighbors, the school kids, Miss Vera, the books they read, the magazines, like all of these external forces.
Miss Vera wasn't external.
Well, she was a book that she was reading, but
Right.
that's what created that imagery in her mind.
Right.
So again, you have all
Yeah.
these external, like even for Ruby, it was that external that created the internal
Yes.
battle.
Yeah.
That rather than saying, this is not accurate, I'm made and formed in the image of God.
Yeah.
No, I have to be made and formed in this
This image. Yeah.
image. And it didn't matter because of the trauma of their parents.
Yeah.
they couldn't even battle
Yeah.
the lies for their kids to say, this is not who you are. Instead, the kids are going, I don't want to be like
I
that.
don't want to be like
I don't want to
you.
be like
Crazy.
daddy. I don't want to be
Yeah.
like mommy. I want to be like my friend.
Yep.
And even to the point where the janitor in the school is fighting for this girl, and she's like,
She's
get
rejecting
away.
him. Yep,
Like
she
the
rejected
one
him.
force that could bring groundedness to this. So there's all over the entire show, you see these fights, and it starts off at the beginning, but you watch the roots begin to grow deeper and deeper until that episode 10 climax where they
Yeah.
had to face off.
They
In
gotta
essence,
face off.
they face off with their demons,
Yeah.
and they had to make a choice. And it's an interesting grounding how they do episode 10. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I think there's no denying the spiritual implications that this show has.
I would love to hear from Little Marvin. I mean, I watched a lot of his
I called him.
commentary.
He wasn't available
Right, he
for the
wasn't
show.
available
yeah.
for this. I mean, I watched a lot of the
Yeah.
commentary, but that was never addressed.
No. And I think it was an
I-
accident that was perfect.
Yeah,
If so.
there's part of me that thinks that because I thought the spiritual implications were an accident until episode 9. And then 'cause up to episode 9, it was kind of like watching Lord of the Rings, and you're like, oh, I see the God stuff in here.
Yeah.
And once episode 9 happened, it was to me it was pretty clear.
Pretty blatant.
It's pretty clear that this is a satanic twist
Mm.
of a godly person.
That's
Yeah.
it.
And there was symbolism that showed you that was about to happen. Like when you see a goat, most times the goat is going to represent the enemy. When you see burning meat, most times that's going to represent something evil going to happen. And I feel like that burning meat that you see at the beginning of episode 9 is representing like the people are going to be burning soon. And you see a goat at
Foreshadowing, yeah, red
yeah,
Wow.
right. You see
Yep.
the goat at the
He's in
beginning
it,
of
man.
episode 9.
Wow.
It's
Brandon
It's about to be the
Brandon
devil.
become
Right.
unreal. He can't
But
play.
check this out. Check
Can't
this out.
play.
This part though. This is the part that really like hit me because I saw how changes in the spiritual will change your physical
Yep.
eyes.
Yep.
The pastor when he dropped his
When he dropped his,
the
yeah,
cross and the lady came back to give it to him,
Yeah.
he looked at her and his vision started
Yes.
to change.
Yes.
He started to see her burnt already. His vision started to change, and that was when you see his attitude change. Right? So when you have that spiritual change on the inside, then it literally starts to change your physical eyes and how you see people, how you respond, how you react.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Which
man.
also goes back to the mental aspect because that will change how you view every scenario in your life. You will misinterpret every scenario in your life because
Man.
of the undealt trauma
Man.
and the
Wow.
undealt things that are in your mind and the things that you're telling yourself. And this is
Yeah.
something I wanted to make sure I got out today is that so many times we believe the lies. When we're talking about the spiritual aspect of the
Yeah.
enemy coming to us and feeding us the lies, and we're like, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what they meant when they said that. That's
Yeah.
exactly what they meant when
Yeah.
they gave me that look. I know what their motive was here. What you need to tell yourself, I learned this a couple years ago. You need to tell yourself when you're journaling, when you're talking it out with someone else, you need to phrase it as the story that I'm making up. The story that I'm telling myself is this, because it separates you from the script.
Yeah.
And you're able to observe it for what it is and say, this is the story that I'm making up. This is the story that I'm telling myself. And then you can show it to the other person and say, is this true?
Mm.
And that person can tell you yes or no, it's not true. Because then you know, and it's not affecting every single thing
Yeah.
that you're going through, but like it's all connected.
Oh man, it's super duper connected.
It's all connected. And I want to say one more thing too. Earlier, when we were talking about the show, and what are one or two thoughts that come to your mind? She said necessary. I think I would say that's the number one word. I couldn't come up with a word better than that. This show is necessary.
Oh yeah. It brings out so many implications
I mean,
that still
it's
exist.
tough
It's-
stuff, man,
it's-
but it
it's-
is so,
It's undesirably
yeah,
necessary.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the headings that I put on my notes was, this is a consciously unconscious conscious.
You gonna walk me through that?
What I seen was that
Clear my
there were
ears
so
up.
many
You're
You
people.
on
had to walk me through that one.
What I seen was that, and I had to like break it down last night in my own mind. I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
What did I say?
But there are so many people in this movie who are consciously unconscious, right? So they're
Yeah.
purposely unconscious of what's going on, and
Yeah.
that's their reality.
Yeah.
Right, that's their conscious.
They
They're
embrace it.
conscious, right?
They're
They're
embracing it.
consciously unconscious conscious. So it's,
Mhm.
I am consciously aware that I am going to ignore what's going on
Yeah.
Yeah.
for my betterment.
Yep.
And so that's what I see as like an overarching theme is like, man, like you're consciously unconscious. You know,
Yeah.
and still don't care that you know.
Yeah.
So I think this is a great stopping point as we kind of have talked about. There's a lot to
Yeah.
digest.
A
And we have a
lot.
lot more to even
We
talk
could
about.
talk for hours.
So I want to encourage you, come back next week for part 2 of our conversation about Amazon's series Them, as we dig in more to a lot of the implications and really the next steps that we need to take as people to really see healthy, growing relationships, healthy, growing people, and really hopefully build a sustainable life for ourselves, because there's a lot that we got to talk about still. So if you tuned in this far, thank you so much. Come back next week for part 2.